At his wedding my son-in-law mocked me. "You're unemployed again? How does it feel to be a loser?" When I came back, Brian was standing near my purse, checking his phone. He looked up as I approached, and for a split second, his mask slipped. The charming smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. Have you ever had someone underestimate you so completely that they handed you the keys to their own destruction? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The wedding bells had just stopped ringing when my new son-in-law destroyed my world with 7 words. Standing in that Charleston church, watching my daughter's happiness, I never expected the man she married to look me dead in the eye and call me a loser. But what Brian didn't know was that this unemployed loser had been quietly building something that would change everything. Have you ever been humiliated at the happiest moment of your life? Do you know what it feels like when someone you helped raise turns their back on you? This is the story of how one cruel comment started a war. Stay with me, because what happened next will shock you. Follow along as we discover how one grandmother's quiet strength became a force that no one saw coming. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I should have known something was wrong when Brian wouldn't look me in the eye during the ceremony. There I sat in the front pew of Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, wearing my best navy dress, the one I'd saved 3 months to buy, watching my only daughter Nicole walk down that aisle like an angel. The morning sun streamed through those stained glass windows, casting rainbow light across her white gown, and my heart swelled with pride so big I thought it might burst right out of my chest. Nicole looked radiant. At 32, she had everything I'd dreamed for her when we left Birmingham all those years ago. College degree from Duke University, a corner office at that big marketing firm in Atlanta, a beautiful downtown apartment with granite countertops and a view of the city skyline. My baby girl had made it, despite growing up with food stamps and hand-me-down clothes. But Brian Whitmore stood at that altar with his jaw tight and his eyes cold, like he was signing a business contract instead of marrying the woman he claimed to love. 6'2", blonde hair slicked back, wearing a $3,000 suit that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. He came from old Virginia money, the kind of family that owned tobacco farms and looked down on folks like us who actually worked for a living. The pastor asked if anyone objected to this union, and Lord help me, I almost stood up. Something deep in my gut told me this man was wrong for my daughter. But Nicole's face glowed with such happiness that I bit my tongue and stayed seated. A mother's love sometimes means swallowing your own instincts to let your child find their own way. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the reception hall next door. White tablecloths, fresh flowers, and a jazz band playing soft music while guests mingled and laughed. I sat at the family table, sipping sweet tea and watching Nicole dance with her new husband. She looked so small in his arms, like a delicate bird that didn't know it was in a cage. That's when Brian's college friends started talking. Loud voices, expensive bourbon, and jokes that made my skin crawl. Stories about his conquests in college, how he liked exotic women, and how he always traded up when he got bored. They thought I couldn't hear them, or maybe they just didn't care if I did. I excused myself to the ladies' room, needing a moment to breathe. The hallway was quiet, decorated with photos from Nicole's childhood that I'd provided, her first day of school, graduation from high school, college acceptance letter. Pictures of a life I'd built with my own 2 hands after her daddy died. When I came back, Brian was standing near my purse, checking his phone. He looked up as I approached, and for a split second, his mask slipped. The charming smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Having a good time, Mrs. Johnson?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "It's a beautiful wedding," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Nicole looks happy." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the mean glint in his blue eyes. The music seemed to fade away, and suddenly it felt like we were the only 2 people in that crowded room. "You know," he said, leaning down so his face was inches from mine, "I've been wondering something all day." My heart started beating faster, sensing danger like an animal in the wild. "What's that?" His smile returned, but it was sharp as a knife. "You're unemployed again, aren't you?" How does it feel to be a loser? The words hit me like a physical blow. My hands started shaking, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. 70 years of struggling, sacrificing, and surviving, and this man, this stranger who'd known my daughter for barely 2 years, had the nerve to call me a loser. I looked across the room at Nicole, laughing with her bridesmaids, completely unaware that her new husband had just delivered the cruelest insult of my entire life. The woman who'd worked 16-hour days to pay for her college, who'd gone without meals so she could have dance lessons, who'd moved to a new state just to give her better opportunities, that woman was being called a loser by a man who'd never worked an honest day in his privileged life. But instead of crumbling, something steel-hard formed in my chest. I looked Brian Whitmore dead in his cold eyes and smiled the sweetest smile I could manage. "You know what, Brian?" I said, my voice calm as Sunday morning. "You're absolutely right. I am unemployed. But that just means I have plenty of time on my hands." The confusion that flickered across his face was almost worth the humiliation. Almost. He straightened up, adjusting his tie like the conversation had never happened, and walked away to rejoin his groomsmen. But I stayed there by the family table, my mind racing faster than it had in years. Have you ever had someone underestimate you so completely that they handed you the keys to their own destruction? Because that's exactly what Brian Whitmore had just done. He thought he was dealing with some broken-down old woman who'd roll over and disappear from his perfect life. He had no idea he'd just declared war on someone who'd survived poverty, racism, single motherhood, and more heartbreak than his soft hands could imagine. Someone who'd learned long ago that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everybody overlooks. As I drove home that night in my 15-year-old Honda, watching the Charleston lights fade in my rearview mirror, I made a decision that would change all our lives forever. Brian Whitmore wanted to play games with an old woman? Fine. Let's play. But this time, the house always wins. Let me tell you where I come from, because understanding my story means understanding why I don't break easy. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, in 1954, right in the heart of everything ugly America had to offer a black woman. My mama cleaned white folks' houses for pennies while my daddy worked double shifts at the steel mill, coming home with hands so rough they could strike matches. We lived in a shotgun house on the wrong side of town, where the railroad tracks separated dreams from reality. By the time I turned 16, I knew 2 things for certain. I wasn't staying in Birmingham, and I wasn't going to spend my life cleaning up after people who looked down on me. But life had other plans. That's when I met James Johnson at a church social in 1972. Lord, that man was fine, tall, dark, with shoulders broad enough to carry the world and a smile that could melt butter in winter. He worked construction during the day and played guitar at night, fingers dancing across those strings like they were making love to the music. Our first date was a walk around the neighborhood because neither of us had money for the movies. But James made me feel like a queen just by the way he looked at me, like I was the most beautiful woman who'd ever walked God's green earth. When he kissed me that night under the streetlight on 5th Avenue, I knew I'd found my partner for life. We got married 6 months later in a ceremony that cost $50 and felt like $1 million. Our wedding night in that tiny apartment above Mrs. Patterson's grocery store was pure magic. James touched me like I was made of precious silk, whispering how beautiful I was, how lucky he felt to have me. We made love with the windows open, summer breeze cooling our skin, and I felt more alive than I'd ever felt in my 18 years. Those early years were hard but happy. James worked construction while I took a job at the textile factory, both of us saving every penny we could. We'd come home tired and dirty, but we'd wash each other's backs in that old clawfoot tub, talking about our dreams. He wanted to start his own construction company. I wanted to own a little restaurant where people felt welcome no matter what color they were. When Nicole came along in 1975, James cried like a baby holding her for the first time. "She's perfect," he whispered, and I knew he'd move mountains to give that little girl everything we never had. But life doesn't care about your plans. James died in a construction accident when Nicole was only 8 years old. A crane collapsed, taking my husband and 2 other good men with it. The company paid out $15,000 and called it even, like you could put a price on a man's life. That night, after the funeral, after everyone went home, I sat in our empty bedroom holding Nicole while she slept. The loneliness felt like drowning, and I had two choices, sink or swim. So I dried my tears, kissed my daughter's forehead, and made a promise to the empty room. James, I whispered to the darkness, I'm going to make sure she has everything we dreamed of. I don't care what it takes. The next morning, I started making plans. Birmingham had nothing left for us but painful memories and limited opportunities. I'd heard about factory work up north in Ohio, better pay, better schools, better chances for a young black girl to make something of herself. 3 months later, we packed everything we owned into my old Buick and drove north on Interstate 65. Nicole pressed her face to the window, watching Alabama disappear behind us, while I gripped the steering wheel and drove toward a future I couldn't see but knew we deserved. Ohio was different. Colder, faster, and nobody cared about your family name or which side of the tracks you came from. I found work at a car parts factory in Cleveland, pulling 12-hour shifts and weekend overtime while Nicole stayed with Mrs. Rodriguez next door. The work was hard, standing on concrete floors, breathing chemical fumes, coming home with aching feet and oil under my fingernails, but the paycheck was honest, and honest money spends just as good as any other kind. At night, after Nicole finished her homework, I'd study too. Bookkeeping, business management, computer skills when they started becoming important. I knew factory work wouldn't last forever, and I wanted to be ready when opportunity knocked. The men at the factory respected me because I worked harder than most of them and never complained about the conditions. Some tried to court me, good men with steady jobs and kind hearts, but I wasn't ready. My heart still belonged to James, and Nicole needed all my attention. Years passed like that. Nicole excelled in school, making honor roll every semester while I worked my way up to floor supervisor. We lived simply but proudly in a small house on Maple Street, where I taught her the lessons James would have wanted her to know: work hard, treat people right, and never let anyone convince you that you're worth less than you are. By the time Nicole graduated high school as valedictorian, I'd saved enough to send her to any college she wanted. Duke University offered her a full academic scholarship, and I cried happy tears watching her pack for North Carolina. "Mama," she said the night before leaving, "I'm going to make you proud." "Baby girl," I told her, "you already have." But success changes people sometimes, and college changed Nicole in ways I didn't expect. The daughter who used to call me every day started calling once a week, then once a month. She made new friends, learned new ways of speaking, and slowly started sounding like she was embarrassed by where she came from. The lessons I learned in those Alabama factories and Ohio assembly lines would serve me well later, especially when dealing with entitled men like Brian. Because working-class wisdom runs deeper than book learning, and respect is something you earn, not something you demand. I should have spoken up when I first saw how he looked at me. But mothers make mistakes when they want their children happy. After James died, the nights were the hardest part. Nicole would fall asleep in my arms, her little body warm against mine, while I stared at the ceiling planning our survival. The life insurance money wouldn't last long, and factory jobs in Birmingham barely paid enough for one person, let alone a mother and child. But I'd learned something important from my own mama: when life knocks you down, you get up swinging. So I started making plans. The move to Cleveland felt like jumping off a cliff with no net, but sometimes that's what courage looks like. I found us a small apartment in a neighborhood where the schools were decent and the streets were safe enough for Nicole to play outside. The rent ate up half my paycheck, but seeing her make friends with kids from different backgrounds was worth every penny. Those first few years, I worked the night shift at the auto parts factory while Nicole stayed with Mrs. Rodriguez. Coming home at 6 in the morning, exhausted and smelling like motor oil, I'd find Nicole already dressed for school, her homework finished and breakfast made. That child was wise beyond her years, understanding without being told that we were building something together. "Mama, why do you work so hard?" she asked one morning, watching me collapse onto the couch still wearing my factory uniform. "Because I want you to have choices I never had," I told her. "Education opens doors, baby girl. I'm working now so you won't have to work like this later." She nodded like she understood, but I could see questions in her 8-year-old eyes. Questions about why other kids had daddies who came to school plays, why we shopped at thrift stores while her classmates wore brand new clothes, why I counted pennies at the grocery store checkout. I made sure she never felt ashamed of our circumstances, but I also made sure she understood the value of what we were building. Every A on her report card meant ice cream for dinner. Every book she read earned her a quarter for her college fund. Every act of kindness toward others got praised like she'd won the lottery. The factory supervisor, a tough Irish woman named Margaret O'Brien, became my mentor and friend. She taught me that respect comes from consistency, not charm. Show up early, work harder than expected, and never make excuses. Those lessons shaped how I raised Nicole and how I later handled Brian's games. During Nicole's teenage years, men started noticing me again. Robert from the grocery store would always give me the best cuts of meat and linger at the checkout with small talk. Marcus from church, a deacon with gentle hands and a steady job at the post office, asked me to dinner more times than I could count. But dating felt like betrayal. Not to James, he would have wanted me to find happiness again, but to the mission. Every hour spent on romance was an hour not spent on Nicole's future. Every dollar spent on a new dress was money that could go toward her college fund. "You deserve love too, Mama," Nicole would say when she caught me turning down another invitation. She was 17 then, beautiful and brilliant, already talking about college applications and career plans. "I have love," I'd tell her. "Right here with you." What I didn't tell her was that some nights, after she went to bed, I'd lie awake remembering James's touch. The way his calloused hands felt gentle on my skin, how he'd pull me close after a long day and make me forget every worry in the world. The loneliness was a physical ache sometimes, but I learned to channel that energy into determination. Nicole graduated valedictorian with a 4.0 GPA and scholarship offers from 8 universities. The day she got her Duke acceptance letter, we both cried on the kitchen floor, holding each other and laughing through our tears. "Mama, we did it," she whispered. "No, baby. You did it. I just made sure you had the chance." College transformed Nicole in ways I'd hoped for and ways I hadn't expected. She learned confidence, sophisticated language, and how to navigate spaces where people like us weren't always welcome. But she also learned to be embarrassed by her roots. The phone calls became shorter. Holiday visits turned into rushed weekends where she seemed uncomfortable in our small house. She'd grown used to luxury, nice restaurants, designer clothes, weekend trips to places I'd only seen in magazines. When she brought Brian home for the first time during her senior year, I knew immediately he was trouble. Not because he was white, I'd taught Nicole that character matters more than color, but because of how he looked at our home. Like he was visiting a museum exhibit called "How Poor People Live." He shook my hand with the tips of his fingers, smiled without showing his teeth, and spent the entire weekend checking his phone like he had somewhere more important to be. When Nicole wasn't looking, he'd glance around our living room with barely concealed disgust, taking in the secondhand furniture and family photos on the mantel. "Your mother seems nice," he told Nicole that Sunday before they left, his voice carefully neutral. But I heard what he really meant: "Your mother is beneath us now." Nicole heard it too, I think, but love makes us deaf to warning signs. She laughed nervously and changed the subject, already choosing sides without realizing it. The months that followed brought subtle changes. Nicole stopped mentioning me in conversations with Brian's family. She started making excuses for why I couldn't visit her in Atlanta. When Brian got promoted to regional manager at his investment firm, Nicole threw a celebration party and somehow forgot to invite her own mother. I should have fought harder for our relationship. Should have demanded respect from the beginning. But I thought patience and understanding would win Nicole back. I thought if I just stayed quiet and supportive, she'd remember who sacrificed everything for her success. That wedding day proved me wrong. As I watched Brian slip that ring onto her finger, I realized I wasn't gaining a son-in-law. I was losing my daughter to a man who saw me as an obstacle to remove. The reception proved it. But what Brian didn't understand was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. Have you ever been dismissed by someone you loved? Someone you'd given everything to help succeed? Drop a comment and let me know, because this story is about to get very interesting. I smiled at Brian that day and played the gracious mother-in-law. But inside, I was already planning his education in respect. And trust me, class was about to begin. The first time Nicole brought Brian home for Christmas, I was making my famous sweet potato pie when he walked into my kitchen uninvited. Not knocking, not asking permission, just strolled in like he owned the place, picked up my rolling pin, and examined it like he was appraising antique furniture. "Interesting technique," he said, watching me roll out the dough. "My mother always had our chef handle the baking." Chef. Not cook, chef. Like he needed me to know the difference between his world and mine. "I've been making this pie for 30 years, I replied, keeping my voice pleasant. "Nicole's favorite since she was little." He set down the rolling pin and leaned against my counter, too close for comfort. There was something predatory in how he moved, like a cat studying a mouse before pouncing. His cologne was expensive and overwhelming, filling my small kitchen with the scent of money and arrogance. "You know, Mrs. Johnson, Nicole's told me so much about her humble beginnings. How hard you work to give her opportunities." He said, humble, like it tasted sour in his mouth. "It's really quite admirable, in a simple sort of way." Simple. Another insult wrapped in fake politeness. That's when I started paying real attention to Brian Whitmore. The way he touched Nicole in public, possessive, controlling, his hand always on her lower back like he was steering her. How he answered questions directed at her, cutting her off mid-sentence with that practiced charm. The subtle ways he isolated her from old friends, suggesting they weren't sophisticated enough for her new lifestyle. During that visit, I watched him work his manipulation like an artist. When Nicole mentioned missing our old Christmas traditions, Brian laughed and said, "Darling, we can start new traditions now. More elevated ones." When she wanted to visit her childhood friends, he had important meetings that required her presence. When she offered to help me cook, he reminded her about the spa appointment he'd booked for them instead. By the end of that weekend, Nicole was apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. Sorry the house was small. Sorry I didn't have cable television. Sorry the neighborhood wasn't what Brian was used to. But the most disturbing moment came late Saturday night. I couldn't sleep, so I went to the kitchen for some warm milk. Through the thin walls, I heard voices from Nicole's old bedroom, Brian's voice, specifically, talking to someone on his phone. "No, man, it's exactly what we discussed," he was saying, his voice low but clear. "She's perfect. Smart, successful, completely cut off from her support system now. The mother's a non-issue, old, unemployed, no influence. Once we're married, I'll have complete control of her finances." My blood turned to ice water. I pressed closer to the wall, praying the floorboards wouldn't creak. "Trust me, Derek, I've done this before. Find a successful woman with family baggage, isolate her from anyone who might ask questions, then slowly take control. Nicole's got over $200,000 in savings, plus that inheritance from her grandmother she doesn't even know I know about." The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. Brian wasn't just wrong for Nicole, he was dangerous. A predator who'd specifically targeted my daughter for her money and vulnerability. The next morning at breakfast, Brian was all smiles and Sunday charm again. He complimented my coffee, asked about my retirement plans, and even offered to pay for some home improvements to make my house more comfortable. Every word dripped with condescension disguised as generosity. "That's very kind," I said, "but I manage just fine on my own." His smile tightened slightly. "Of course. I just thought. Well, Nicole worries about you being alone." "We both do." Nicole looked up from her eggs, surprised. "I never said I was worried, Brian." "Well, naturally you would be," he replied smoothly. "It's only natural to be concerned about aging parents living alone in areas like this." Areas like this. A neighborhood where honest people worked honest jobs and looked out for each other. But Brian saw it as a problem to be solved, preferably by removing me from Nicole's life entirely. After they left that Sunday, I sat in my living room surrounded by family photos and made some hard decisions. I couldn't just tell Nicole what I'd overheard. She was too deep in his web to believe me. I needed proof, strategy, and patience. So I did what any smart woman would do. I started digging. The local library became my second home. I learned to use computers, search public records, and follow paper trails. Brian Michael Whitmore, born in Richmond, Virginia, to Charles and Patricia Whitmore. Father owned 3 car dealerships, mother served on charity boards. Private school education, University of Virginia business degree, and a job at his father's friend's investment firm. But the interesting part wasn't what I found, it was what I didn't find. No long-term relationships in his past. No ex-girlfriends who spoke fondly of him. No college friends who kept in touch. For a charming man in his 30s, Brian Whitmore had remarkably few people in his life who actually seemed to know him. I started calling numbers, pretending to be planning a surprise party for Nicole. Amazing how much people will tell you when they think you're trying to do something nice. Brian? Oh, we dated for about 8 months, said a woman named Jennifer from Atlanta. He was intense. Always asking about my job, my savings, my family situation. Started getting weird about money toward the end, wanting to help with my investments. I broke it off when I found out he'd been looking through my financial documents. Another woman, Lisa from Charlotte, charming at first, but controlling. He isolated me from my friends, criticized my family, made me feel like I needed him to be complete. Thank God I figured it out before things went too far. The pattern became clear. Brian Whitmore specialized in successful black women who'd worked hard to escape difficult backgrounds. Women who might be grateful for a man from a good family. Women who might overlook red flags because they wanted to belong in his world. My daughter wasn't his first target. She was just his latest project. What would you do if you discovered someone was targeting your child? How far would you go to protect the person you love most? Because I was about to find out exactly how far this grandmother would go. And Brian Whitmore was about to learn that some women don't break, they fight back. Marcus Thompson didn't look like much when he walked into that coffee shop in downtown Charleston. Mid-40s, graying beard, clothes that had seen better days. But when he sat across from me and pulled out that worn leather notebook, I knew I'd found my secret weapon. Mrs. Williams, I've been doing this for 23 years, he said, his voice low and careful. I've seen cases like this before. Men who think they're untouchable because they wear expensive suits and live in big houses. I leaned forward, my heart racing. Can you prove what he's doing to my daughter? Marcus's eyes darkened. Ma'am, if Brian's half the predator you think he is, I'll find the evidence. But I need to warn you. Sometimes the truth is uglier than we expect. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. What had Brian been hiding? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Nicole, how she'd changed since marrying him. The way she flinched when he raised his voice. How she'd stopped wearing those bright colors she loved. The phone calls that ended abruptly when Brian walked into the room. Have you ever loved someone so much that watching them suffer felt like dying? Drop a heart in the comments if you know that feeling. 3 days later, Marcus called. Mrs. Williams, we need to meet. Tonight. Somewhere private. My hands shook as I drove to the abandoned parking lot he'd suggested. When I saw his face in the dim streetlight, I knew he'd found something terrible. Before I show you this, he said, pulling out a manila envelope. You need to understand, this will change everything. Are you ready for that? I thought about James, my husband, and how he'd always told me to fight for what's right. I thought about Nicole, my baby girl, trapped in something she couldn't see clearly. I thought about that wedding day, the way Brian had looked at me like I was nothing. Show me, I whispered. Marcus opened the envelope and spread photos across his dashboard. My blood ran cold. There was Brian, entering a motel room with a young woman who wasn't my daughter. Then another photo, different woman, same guilty smile. Then bank statements showing mysterious cash withdrawals. Credit card receipts from expensive restaurants on dates when he told Nicole he was working late. But the worst photo made my heart stop. Brian in what looked like an office, his hand on a young woman's thigh, her face turned away, body language screaming discomfort. Who is she? I managed to ask. His secretary. 22 years old. Fresh out of college. Marcus's voice was grim. There's more, Mrs. Williams. He's been using his position at the law firm to pressure young women. Nicole isn't his first victim, she's just his most successful conquest. The world felt like it was tilting. My daughter had married a monster. There's something else, Marcus continued, pulling out another document. Brian's been stealing money from the law firm. Small amounts, but consistent. He's been living beyond his means for months. I stared at the evidence, my mind racing. Brian thought he was so smart, so superior. He'd called me a loser on my daughter's wedding day. But losers don't gather ammunition this devastating. What do we do now? I asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Now, Mrs. Williams, we build a case that will bring him to his knees. As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, power. Real power. Brian had no idea what was coming for him. But first, I had to figure out how to save Nicole without destroying her in the process. Because the hardest part wasn't gathering evidence against Brian, it was knowing that when the truth came out, my daughter's heart would shatter into a million pieces. How far would you go to protect someone you love from a manipulator? Comment below, because this grandmother was about to find out exactly how far her love could take her. The next morning, I woke up with a plan so bold it scared me. If Brian thought he could humiliate me and get away with it, he was about to learn something about this old woman from Birmingham. I called Nicole, keeping my voice light and casual. Sweetheart, I was thinking about hosting a family dinner next weekend. You know, to celebrate your marriage properly. Oh, Mama, that's so sweet, Nicole's voice brightened. Brian would love that. He's been saying we should spend more time together as a family. The lie rolled off her tongue so easily it broke my heart. But I had work to do. Perfect. And honey, why don't you invite some of Brian's colleagues? I'd love to meet the people he works with. There was a pause. Are you sure, Mama? You know how Brian's friends can be. Darling, I want to make an effort. For you. Marcus had given me homework. Get his colleagues to your house, he'd said. Especially the women. Let them see him in a relaxed environment. Trust me, predators can't help themselves when they feel safe. That weekend, I transformed my modest apartment into something special. Candlelight, soft music, my grandmother's china that I'd saved for decades. Nicole arrived early to help, and for a moment, seeing her laugh as we arranged flowers, I remembered my little girl. Then Brian walked in, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mrs. Williams, he said, that fake smile plastered on his face. What a lovely setup. Very quaint. Every word from his mouth felt like poison, but I smiled back. Thank you, Brian. I wanted everything perfect for my son-in-law. The guests arrived one by one. Richard, the senior partner. Linda, the paralegal with tired eyes. And Jessica, the young secretary from Marcus's photos. When I saw her in person, my heart ached. She was Nicole's age, maybe younger, with the same hopeful smile my daughter used to have. Jessica, I said warmly, I've heard so much about you. Come, sit next to me. Brian's eyes flashed with something that looked like panic, but he covered it quickly. As dinner progressed, I watched Brian like a hawk. The way he interrupted Jessica when she spoke. How his hand lingered on her shoulder when he reached for the salt. The uncomfortable shift in her posture when he leaned too close. Brian, I said suddenly, why don't you tell everyone about your college days? Nicole loves those stories. Oh, Mama, Nicole laughed. Brian was quite the ladies' man back then, weren't you, honey? The room went quiet. Brian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That was a long time ago," he said. "I'm a different man now." "Of course you are," I replied sweetly. "Marriage changes everything, doesn't it?" But I was watching Jessica, and I saw something that made my blood boil. When Brian said, "different man," she looked down at her plate, her knuckles white around her fork. This girl knew exactly what kind of man he really was. After dinner, while Nicole was in the kitchen, I cornered Jessica in the hallway. "Sweetheart," I said quietly, "are you okay?" Her eyes filled with tears instantly. I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Williams." "Honey, I've been a woman for 70 years. I know the look of someone carrying a secret that's eating them alive." Jessica glanced toward the kitchen where Brian's laughter echoed. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd make sure I never worked in this city again." My heart broke for this child. "What did he do to you?" "It started with late nights at the office," she whispered. "Then drinks after work. Then..." She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. "Jessica, look at me." I took her hands in mine. "That man in there is married to my daughter. If he's hurt you, he's going to hurt her too. But we can stop him." Her eyes widened. "How?" I thought about Marcus's evidence, about the photos, about the financial records. About every woman Brian had probably silenced with fear and shame. By being brave enough to tell the truth. Just then, Brian appeared in the hallway. "Jessica, there you are. We should probably head out." The transformation was instant. Jessica's face went blank, her shoulders hunched, and she stepped away from me like I was dangerous. "Of course, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice completely different. After everyone left, Nicole helped me clean up. "Mama, that was wonderful. Brian said he really enjoyed himself." I'll bet he did, I thought. Nothing like intimidating young women to work up an appetite. "Nicole," I said carefully, "how are things at home?" "Really?" She paused, a dish halfway to the sink. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy?" For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw the loneliness, the doubt, the fear. But then she straightened up and smiled that practiced smile. "Of course I'm happy, Mama. Brian takes good care of me." That night, I called Marcus. "We need to move faster. He's got more victims than we thought, and my daughter is in deeper trouble than I realized." "What happened at dinner?" I told him about Jessica, about the fear in her eyes, about the way Brian controlled the room without anyone noticing. "Mrs. Williams," Marcus said, "I think we need to consider something bigger than just catching him cheating. This man is dangerous." As I hung up the phone, I looked at the photos on my mantle. Pictures of Nicole as a little girl, graduating college, so proud and full of dreams. Brian was stealing all of that, piece by piece. But this grandmother from Birmingham wasn't going down without a fight. What would you do if you discovered your child's partner was a predator? Let me know in the comments, because this story is about to take a turn that shocked everyone, including me. 2 weeks later, Nicole called me crying. Through her sobs, I could barely make out the words, "Mama, I need you." Something happened at Lisa's wedding. Lisa was Nicole's college roommate, getting married in Savannah. Brian had insisted they attend, said it would be good for networking. Now I knew why. I drove through the night to reach them. When I arrived at their hotel, Nicole met me in the lobby, her face puffy from crying, wearing sunglasses indoors. "What happened, baby?" She led me to a quiet corner, looking around nervously. "Brian, at the reception, he disappeared for almost 2 hours. When I found him, he was coming out of a hotel room with the bride's younger sister, Tiffany." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, coming out of a room?" Her dress was wrinkled, her lipstick was gone, and Brian's tie was in his pocket. Nicole's voice cracked. When I asked him about it, he said I was being paranoid and jealous. The same manipulation tactics. The same gaslighting. I wanted to drive straight to his room and give him a piece of my mind, but I forced myself to stay calm. Nicole, listen to me carefully. Has this happened before? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely a whisper, there have been signs. Phone calls he takes in private. Late nights that don't add up. Women who look at me funny when we're out together. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought I was going crazy, she exploded, then quickly lowered her voice. Every time I brought up concerns, he made me feel stupid. He'd say things like, your mother raised you to be suspicious of men, or, this is what happens when you come from a broken home. The rage that hit me was so intense I had to grip the chair arms to steady myself. He'd been using my own struggles as a single mother to manipulate my daughter. Where is he now? At the bar with the groomsmen. Acting like nothing happened. I stood up. Come on. Mama, what are you doing? Something I should have done at your wedding. We found Brian holding court at the hotel bar, regaling a group of men with some story that had them all laughing. When he saw us approaching, his smile faltered for just a second. There are my beautiful girls, he said loudly. Come join us. I walked right up to him, close enough that he had to step back. Brian, I think we need to have a conversation. In private. The other men sensed the tension and started to drift away. Nicole grabbed my arm. Mama, please don't. Mrs. Williams, Brian interrupted, his voice smooth as silk, if you have something to say, you can say it here. He thought he was calling my bluff. This young fool had no idea what a cornered grandmother from Alabama could do. All right, I said, loud enough for the remaining guests to hear. I want to know why you were in a hotel room with a 21-year-old girl while your wife of 3 months was looking for you. The bar went silent. Brian's face went white, then red. That's a serious accusation, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I was helping Tiffany find her room. She'd had too much to drink. For 2 hours? I don't have to explain myself to you. No, I said, stepping closer, but you'll explain yourself to Nicole. Right now. Nicole looked between us, confusion and pain written all over her face. Brian, what is she talking about? For the first time since I'd known him, Brian looked genuinely rattled. Nicole, your mother is trying to cause problems in our marriage. Answer the question, I pressed. Where were you for 2 hours? I already told you. Brian. Nicole's voice was quiet but firm. Just answer her. He opened his mouth, then closed it. In that moment of silence, I saw something beautiful happen. Nicole straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and for the first time in months, she looked like the strong woman I'd raised. I was. Brian started, then stopped. This is ridiculous. I don't have to defend myself against paranoid accusations. The only thing ridiculous, I said, is a grown man who thinks he can disrespect his wife and her family without consequences. Brian's mask was slipping. The charming smile was gone, replaced by something cold and angry. Mrs. Williams, I think you should go back to your room. You're obviously upset and not thinking clearly. Oh, I'm thinking very clearly. Clearer than I have in months. Nicole stepped between us. Stop. Both of you. This is embarrassing. But something had shifted. I could see it in her eyes. The doubt was growing. The questions she'd been pushing down were starting to surface. Nicole, I said gently, ask him where his tie went. She looked at Brian, then at his open collar. Where is your tie? It was hot. I took it off. You never take off your tie at formal events, Nicole said slowly. You always say it's unprofessional. Brian's jaw clenched. I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated like a criminal. No, Nicole said, her voice getting stronger, you're going to stand here and be honest with your wife. The silence stretched between them like a live wire. Finally, Brian grabbed his drink and finished it in one gulp. Fine. You want honesty? Tiffany was upset about her boyfriend cheating on her. I was comforting her. That's what decent people do, they help others. In her hotel room? Where else? The hallway? Nicole studied his face for a long moment. You're lying. Those two words hit Brian like a physical blow. What did you just say to me? I said you're lying. And the worst part is, you think I'm stupid enough to believe you. The pride that swelled in my chest almost knocked me over. My daughter was finding her voice. Brian's true nature was starting to show. Nicole, you're being influenced by your mother's bitterness. She's trying to poison our marriage because she's jealous of our success. Wrong move, Brian. Don't you dare, Nicole said, her voice deadly quiet, talk about my mother that way. Your mother is a bitter old woman who can't stand to see you happy. That's when I knew we had him. Because in trying to turn Nicole against me, he'd pushed too hard. Nicole's face went from hurt to furious in seconds. Get away from me, she told him. Right now. Nicole. I said get away from me. Brian looked around the bar, realizing he'd created a scene. Other guests were staring. Some were recording with their phones. We'll discuss this when you calm down, he said, trying to regain control. No, Nicole said, we'll discuss this when you decide to tell me the truth. As Brian stormed out, Nicole collapsed into a chair. Mama, what if I made a terrible mistake? I sat beside her and held her hand. Baby, the only mistake would be staying with someone who doesn't respect you. But even as I comforted her, I knew this was just the beginning. Brian would try to win her back, manipulate her, make her doubt herself. That's what men like him do. Good thing this grandmother had a few more tricks up her sleeve. Have you ever had to watch someone you love wake up to a painful truth? Share your story in the comments, because what happened next would test every bond this family had. Brian didn't waste time launching his counterattack. By Monday morning, Nicole was receiving text messages every hour. Flowers delivered to her office. Voice messages that alternated between desperate apologies and subtle threats. Nicole, baby, your mother is trying to destroy us. She's always resented our happiness. Don't let her poison what we have. When Nicole showed me the messages, my hands clenched into fists. This man was textbook manipulation, and I'd seen it before in Birmingham when I was young. Men who used love as a weapon. What should I do, Mama? You should document everything. Every message, every call, every gift he sends. Document? Why? I looked at my daughter, so intelligent in business but so naive about predators. Because honey, this isn't over. Men like Brian don't just walk away quietly. I was right. That afternoon, Brian showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, he was standing there in his expensive suit, that calculated smile on his face. But his eyes were different now, cold, calculating. Mrs. Williams, I think we need to clear the air. I think you need to leave my property. May I come in? What I have to say is important. Against my better judgment, I let him in. But I left the door open and kept my phone in my hand. Brian walked into my living room like he owned it, examining my furniture, my pictures, my life with obvious disdain. You have a nice place here, he said. Small, but cozy. Every word was designed to remind me of our different social classes. Say what you came to say, Brian. He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw the real man behind the mask. The charm was completely gone. I know what you're trying to do, he said. You're trying to break up my marriage because you can't stand that Nicole doesn't need you anymore. Is that what you think this is about? I think you're a lonely old woman who's jealous of her daughter's success. Nicole married up, and you can't handle it. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. But I'd heard worse from white supervisors in Birmingham factories. This boy had no idea who he was dealing with. You know what I think, Brian? I said, sitting down and making myself comfortable. I think you're scared. His confident posture wavered slightly. Scared of what? Scared that Nicole is starting to see through your act. Scared that all those young women you've been bothering might start talking. Scared that someone might look too closely at your finances. Brian went very still. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You don't know anything about my finances. I know you've been taking money that doesn't belong to you. I know about the motel rooms. I know about Jessica. The color drained from his face completely. You're bluffing. I reached into my purse and pulled out one of Marcus's photos, Brian entering the motel with a woman who clearly wasn't Nicole. Am I? Brian stared at the photo for a long moment. When he looked up, the mask was completely gone. What I saw in his eyes made me understand why Nicole had been walking on eggshells. What do you want? He asked, his voice flat and dangerous. I want you to leave my daughter alone. Permanently. And if I don't? Then these photos go to your law firm, your clients, and anyone else who needs to see them. Brian took a step toward me, and I felt a chill of real fear. You're making a big mistake, old woman. The only mistake I made was not protecting my daughter from you sooner. Nicole will never believe you. She loves me. Nicole loves the man she thinks you are. But that man doesn't exist, does he? Brian's face twisted with rage. You have no idea what I'm capable of. And you have no idea what a grandmother from Birmingham is capable of when you threaten her family. We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Brian straightened his tie and walked toward the door. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed, it's not. But you might want to think carefully about your next move. Because I have resources you don't know about, and I'm not afraid to use them. After he left, I double-locked the door and called Marcus immediately. He knows we're onto him, I said. And he just threatened me directly. Good, Marcus said. Desperate men make mistakes. We're going to catch him in a big one. What's the next step? Now we give him enough rope to hang himself with. But Mrs. Williams, you need to be very careful. Men like Brian can be dangerous when they're cornered. That night, I couldn't shake the look in Brian's eyes when he'd stepped toward me. Nicole was married to that man. Sleeping next to him every night. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? He hadn't actually done anything illegal that I could prove. Yet. But I'd rattled him, and that was exactly what Marcus wanted. Scared men reveal their true nature. I just hoped Nicole would be safe while we waited for him to show his. Have you ever confronted someone who was hurting someone you love? Tell us about it in the comments, because this confrontation was about to set off a chain reaction that would explode everything. Marcus called me at 6 in the morning, his voice electric with excitement. Mrs. Williams, he took the bait. Brian made contact with someone who can destroy him. What are you talking about? Remember I told you desperate men make mistakes? Well, your son-in-law just made a big one. I was already reaching for my clothes. I'm coming to your office. No, meet me at the courthouse coffee shop. And Mrs. Williams? Bring a voice recorder if you have one. My hands shook as I drove downtown. Whatever Marcus had discovered, it was big enough to change everything. I found him in the back corner booth, looking like he'd been up all night. When I sat down, he slid a thick folder across the table. Open it. Inside were phone records, text messages, and photos that made my blood run cold. Brian hadn't just been cheating on Nicole, he'd been running an elaborate scheme to blackmail the women he'd been involved with. He's been photographing them without consent, Marcus explained quietly. Then using those photos to keep them quiet about the harassment. Some of these women paid him money to keep their images private. My stomach turned. How many? At least 7 that I can prove. Maybe more. The scope of Brian's cruelty was breathtaking. These weren't just affairs, this was calculated destruction of innocent women. There's more, Marcus continued. After your confrontation, he panicked and reached out to someone he shouldn't have. He showed me a text message thread between Brian and someone named Tony. "Brian, I need those photos deleted. All of them. Tonight." "Tony, that's gonna cost you extra. Double our usual rate." "Brian, fine. Just make them disappear." "Who's Tony?" I asked. Marcus smiled grimly. "Tony Russo. Small-time criminal who runs a photo deletion service for cheating husbands. The FBI has been watching him for months." My heart stopped. "The FBI? Mrs. Williams, your son-in-law just contacted a federal target. Every communication Tony has is being monitored." The room felt like it was spinning. "What does this mean?" "It means Brian just handed us evidence of obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. The feds are going to be very interested in his little photography hobby." I stared at the documents, hardly believing what I was seeing. "How did you get all this?" "I have friends in law enforcement. When they realized Brian was connected to Tony, they started paying attention. Your timing was perfect, Mrs. Williams. If you hadn't confronted him when you did, he might have destroyed evidence before we could document it." "What happens now?" Marcus leaned forward. "Now we have a choice. We can hand this over to the FBI and let them handle it, or what? Or we can use this information to make sure Brian faces consequences in every part of his life before the feds get involved." I thought about Nicole, about Jessica, about all those other women whose lives Brian had destroyed. Legal justice was important, but sometimes personal justice meant more. "What do you have in mind?" "His law firm's annual partners meeting is this Friday. Brian's up for promotion to junior partner. Richard Morrison, the senior partner, will be making the announcement." "So?" Marcus pulled out another document. "So, what if Richard received an anonymous package containing evidence of Brian's criminal activities? What if all the partners learned exactly what kind of man they've been working with?" The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. Brian's career, his reputation, his financial security, all of it would crumble in one afternoon. But what about Nicole? Won't this hurt her too? Nicole works for a different firm. If anything, distancing herself from Brian will help her career. That evening, I called Nicole to check on her. She sounded exhausted. "Mama, Brian's been acting strange all day. Nervous, jumpy. He keeps making phone calls and hanging up when I come into the room." "How are you feeling about everything?" "Confused. Angry. Scared." She paused. "I keep thinking about what you said at Savannah. About trusting my instincts." "What are your instincts telling you?" "That I married a stranger." The pain in her voice broke my heart, but I was also proud. Nicole was finally seeing clearly. "Baby, whatever happens in the next few days, I want you to know that you're strong enough to handle it. You're my daughter, and we Williams women don't break easily." "What do you mean, whatever happens?" I chose my words carefully. "I mean that sometimes the truth comes out in ways we don't expect. And when it does, we have to be ready." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with Marcus's folder spread before me. Pictures of broken women, financial records showing stolen money, text messages revealing the depth of Brian's manipulation. Tomorrow, Marcus would deliver the package to Richard Morrison. By Friday afternoon, Brian's world would collapse. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't experienced since James died, the satisfaction of knowing that justice was coming. I thought about that wedding day, the way Brian had whispered "loser" in my ear like a curse. He thought my unemployment, my struggles, my simple life made me powerless. He was about to learn that the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. I picked up my phone and called Jessica. "Mrs. Williams?" She sounded surprised. "Honey, I need you to do something brave. But I promise you, after this week, Brian will never be able to hurt you or anyone else again." "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to write down everything that happened between you and Brian. Every detail, every date, everything you can remember. Why now? Because sometimes justice needs a push. And this time, it's getting one. Friday was going to be a day Brian Henderson would never forget. Have you ever had to choose between staying quiet and fighting for what's right? Comment below, because this grandmother was about to find out that some fights are worth everything. Friday morning arrived like Judgment Day. I woke up before dawn, my stomach churning with nervous energy. By 8 o'clock, Marcus would deliver the package to Morrison and Associates. By noon, Brian's life as he knew it would be over. But first, I had one more call to make. Nicole, honey, how are you feeling today? Actually, better than I have in weeks, she said, and I could hear the strength returning to her voice. I've been thinking about everything you said in Savannah. About trusting my instincts. And what are your instincts telling you? That I need to have a serious conversation with my husband when he gets home tonight. Perfect timing. By tonight, Brian would have bigger problems than explaining his behavior to Nicole. Baby, whatever you decide to do, I'm proud of you for thinking for yourself again. Mama, can I ask you something? Anything. How did you know? About Brian, I mean. You saw through him from the beginning. I thought about James, about the men I'd worked for in Birmingham who thought they could intimidate me with their power and money. About learning to read people's true nature beneath their polished surfaces. Experience, honey. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that the people who try hardest to impress you are usually the ones with the most to hide. At exactly 8:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, package delivered. Now we wait. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, trying to keep busy. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped. But it was just telemarketers and Nicole calling to check in. Then, at 2:47 p.m., my phone exploded with calls. First Nicole, Mama, something's happening at Brian's firm. He called me crying, saying there was some kind of emergency meeting. Then Marcus, it's happening. Richard Morrison called an emergency partners meeting. Brian's been suspended pending investigation. Then, most surprisingly, Jessica, Mrs. Williams, I don't know what you did, but Brian just got escorted out of the building by security. Everyone's talking about some kind of evidence package. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the chaos I'd orchestrated, and felt something I hadn't experienced since my husband died, complete and total vindication. An hour later, Nicole called again. This time she was crying, but not the broken sobs I'd heard before. These were tears of rage. Mama, he lied about everything. The firm just called me. They said Brian's been stealing money and harassing employees. They found photos on his computer, Mama. Photos of women who never gave permission. Are you safe, honey? Where is he now? I don't know. He called me screaming, saying you destroyed his life. He said terrible things about you, about our family. Things I won't repeat. Nicole, listen to me very carefully. Do not go home alone tonight. Come stay with me. I can't hide forever. You're not hiding. You're being smart. When men like Brian lose everything, they become dangerous. That evening, Nicole arrived at my apartment with 2 suitcases and red eyes. But there was something different about her, a strength I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. I called a lawyer, she announced. I'm filing for divorce. The pride that filled my chest was overwhelming. Good girl. And Mama? I owe you an apology. You tried to warn me, and I chose him over you. I'm so sorry. I held my daughter while she cried, stroking her hair like I had when she was little. Baby, you don't owe me any apologies. You followed your heart. That's what you're supposed to do. But my heart was wrong. No, your heart was right to want love. Brian was wrong to fake it. We were interrupted by pounding on my door. Loud, aggressive knocking that made us both freeze. Mrs. Williams. Open this door. I know you're in there. Brian's voice was slurred, angry, desperate. Nicole grabbed my arm. "Don't answer it," she whispered. But the pounding continued, getting louder. "You destroyed my life, you bitter old woman. Everything I worked for." I called 911 while Nicole peeked through the curtains. "He's drunk," she whispered. "Really drunk. And he's got something in his hand." My blood went cold. "What kind of something?" "I can't tell. It's dark." The police arrived within 10 minutes, but by then Brian was gone. The officer who took our statement was young, professional, and concerned. "Ma'am, based on what you've told me, I'd recommend a restraining order. Men who lose everything at once can become unpredictable." After the police left, Nicole and I sat in my kitchen drinking tea, both of us shaken. "Mama, what if he comes back? Then he'll find out that this old woman from Birmingham knows how to protect her family." I didn't tell Nicole about the baseball bat I kept by my bed, or the pepper spray in my purse, or the fact that Marcus had arranged for someone to watch my building. What I did tell her was this: "Baby, you're free now. And freedom is always worth fighting for." As we prepared for bed, I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something stronger. Something that reminded me of myself at her age, facing an uncertain future with nothing but determination. Brian had called me a loser on her wedding day. But losers don't bring down predators. Losers don't save their daughters from monsters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, my girl was safe. And Brian Henderson was about to learn that some women don't just get mad, they get even. Have you ever had to choose between safety and justice? Drop a comment below, because this grandmother's fight was just getting started, and what happened next would change everything forever. Monday morning brought visitors I never expected to see in my modest apartment, 2 FBI agents in dark suits standing at my door like something out of a movie. "Mrs. Williams? I'm Agent Patricia Davis, and this is Agent Michael Chin. We'd like to speak with you about Brian Henderson." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. "Come in." Agent Davis was a sharp-eyed woman about Nicole's age with the kind of confidence that comes from dealing with criminals every day. Agent Chin looked younger, more nervous, like this was one of his first big cases. "Mrs. Williams, we understand you've been investigating your son-in-law's activities," Agent Davis said, settling into my kitchen chair. "I've been protecting my daughter. We respect that. And we need your help." They spread photos across my kitchen table, some I recognized from Marcus's investigation, others that made my stomach turn. Brian with different women, financial records, bank transfers to offshore accounts. "This goes deeper than harassment and theft," Agent Chin explained. "Brian's been running a blackmail operation for over 2 years. He targets young professional women, creates compromising situations, then extorts money to keep quiet." "How much money?" "Close to $300,000 that we can track. Probably more in cash transactions." I stared at the evidence, thinking about all those women paying him to protect their reputations while he destroyed their lives. "What do you need from me?" Agent Davis leaned forward. "We need Nicole to cooperate. As his wife, she has access to his personal accounts, his home computer, documents we can't legally obtain without a warrant. She'll do it. Mrs. Williams, you should know, when we arrest Brian, this will become public. Nicole's marriage, your family situation, everything will be scrutinized." I thought about my daughter, finally free from Brian's manipulation but about to face public humiliation. Then I thought about Jessica, and all the other women still living in fear. "Agent Davis, my daughter married a monster. She deserves to know the truth, and those other women deserve justice. There's one more thing," Agent Chin added quietly. "Brian's employer doesn't know about the investigation yet. If he's warned, he might destroy evidence or flee." "What are you asking me to do?" "Help us catch him in the act. We're setting up a sting operation, and we need someone he trusts to make contact." My blood ran cold. "You want me to wear a wire?" "Nothing that dangerous. We just need him to incriminate himself on a recorded phone call." That afternoon, I called Nicole to prepare her. When I explained about the FBI, she went silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Nicole? Are you there? I'm here, Mama. I'm just processing. The FBI? Baby, Brian's hurt a lot of women. Not just affairs, he's been blackmailing them. Oh my God. Her voice was barely a whisper. The late nights, the mysterious money, the way he acted around female colleagues. Will you help them? Yes. Absolutely yes. When do they need me? That evening, Agent Davis called with the plan. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., you'll call Brian and tell him you want to make a deal. You'll say you're willing to keep quiet about his activities in exchange for him leaving Nicole alone. And you think he'll admit to crimes over the phone? Mrs. Williams, arrogant men like Brian can't resist gloating when they think they've won. He'll want to tell you exactly how powerless you are. Tuesday at 3 p.m., I sat in Agent Davis's car outside a Charleston parking garage, wearing a wire that felt like it weighed 50 pounds. My hands shook as I dialed Brian's number. He answered on the first ring. What do you want, old woman? I want to make a deal. Silence. Then, what kind of deal? I stop interfering in your marriage, you treat my daughter with respect. Brian's laugh was cold and bitter. You think you have something to bargain with? I think we both know what I have. Those photos? Please. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Then explain it to me. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him calculating. Agent Davis nodded encouragingly from the driver's seat. Fine, Brian said finally. You want to know what you're dealing with? I've been documenting my interactions with women for years. Insurance policies, you might call them. Insurance against what? False accusations. Harassment claims. Women who get ideas above their station. His voice was getting more confident, more arrogant. I've got photos, videos, recordings of every woman who's ever tried to cause problems for me. My stomach turned, but I pressed on. And you use these insurance policies, how? However I need to. Sometimes a woman needs reminding that her reputation is fragile. Sometimes she needs motivation to keep her mouth shut. Sometimes she needs to contribute to my financial well-being. You mean you blackmail them? I mean I protect myself. And if those women choose to show their gratitude financially, that's their decision. Agent Davis was writing furiously on her notepad, a grim smile on her face. What about Nicole? Do you have insurance on her too? Brian's pause was telling. Nicole's my wife. She's different. Different how? She has more to lose. Her career, her reputation, her family standing. If she ever thought about leaving me, well, let's just say divorce can get very messy when one party has compromising information. The rage that filled me was so intense I had to grip the phone to keep from screaming. This monster had been holding my daughter hostage with threats. So you're saying you'll destroy Nicole if she tries to leave you? I'm saying marriage is about mutual understanding. Nicole understands that our life together benefits everyone, including you, Mrs. Williams. That modest apartment you live in? The car you drive? Nicole's been supplementing your income with money I provide. Money you stole. Money I earned through strategic investments and careful relationship management. Agent Davis was giving me thumbs-up signals. Brian was confessing to everything. Brian, let me ask you something. What happens if those women decide to stop paying you? They won't. They're too scared. Too ashamed. Besides, who would believe them over a respected attorney? What if they had help? What if someone believed them? Brian's voice turned sharp. Is that a threat, Mrs. Williams? It's a question. Well, here's an answer for you. I've got enough dirt on enough people in this city to bury anyone who tries to cross me. Including your precious daughter. You'd really hurt Nicole to protect yourself? I'd do whatever necessary to protect my life and my reputation. Nicole knew what she was getting into when she married me. That was it. The final confession Agent Davis needed. Well, Brian, I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded, I guess we'll see about that. What's that supposed to mean? It means some people are harder to bury than you think. I hung up and looked at Agent Davis. Did you get what you needed? She was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. Mrs. Williams, your son-in-law just confessed to extortion, blackmail, theft, and conspiracy on a federal wiretap. We've got him. When will you arrest him? Tonight. We'll coordinate with local police to pick him up at his office. As Agent Davis drove me home, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Justice was coming, but the hardest part was still ahead, helping Nicole rebuild her life from the ruins of her marriage. Mrs. Williams, Agent Davis said as we pulled up to my building, what you did today took real courage. Those women Brian victimized will finally get justice because you refused to stay quiet. That evening, I cooked Nicole's favorite meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, just like I used to make when she was little. When she arrived, she looked exhausted but determined. Mama, I've been thinking about everything. About the signs I ignored, the red flags I dismissed. Honey. No, let me finish. I married him because he made me feel special, sophisticated, like I'd finally made it. But really, he was just isolating me from everyone who truly loved me. As if on cue, my phone rang. Agent Davis. Mrs. Williams, Brian Henderson has been arrested. He's in federal custody. I looked at Nicole, who was watching my face carefully. Was that about Brian? She asked. Yes, baby. It's over. He's been arrested. Nicole closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, she looked like the strong woman I'd raised. Good, she said simply. Now I can start healing. But both of us knew this was just the beginning. The trial, the media attention, the rebuilding, all of that lay ahead. Still, for the first time in months, we could sleep peacefully. What would you do if your family member was trapped by a predator? Let us know in the comments, because this grandmother's journey was about to take one final, shocking turn. 3 weeks later, I sat in Assistant District Attorney Carmen Rodriguez's office, surrounded by boxes of evidence that would destroy Brian Henderson's life forever. Mrs. Williams, I want you to understand what we're dealing with here, Carmen said, her voice serious. Brian's case has attracted national attention. The media is calling it the Charleston blackmail ring. This trial will be a circus. Nicole squeezed my hand. Since Brian's arrest, she'd been staying with me, slowly rebuilding her confidence and her life. The divorce papers were filed, but the criminal trial would determine whether Brian spent the next decade in federal prison. How many victims are testifying? Nicole asked. 12 confirmed. Maybe more as word spreads. Carmen pulled out a thick file. Jessica Martinez, your husband's secretary, is our star witness. But Mrs. Williams, your recorded phone call is the cornerstone of our case. I thought about that phone call, how Brian had confessed everything while thinking he was intimidating me. Will it be enough? Combined with the financial evidence and victim testimony? Yes. But Brian's hired an expensive legal team. They're going to try to paint him as the victim of a vindictive mother-in-law. Nicole bristled. That's ridiculous. Ridiculous, but potentially effective. Jury trials are unpredictable, especially when race and class dynamics are involved. The reality hit me like a cold slap. Brian would use every advantage he had, his education, his skin color, his social connections, to make me look like the villain. What do I need to do? I asked. Carmen leaned forward. Tell your story exactly as it happened. Don't let them rattle you. And Mrs. Williams? Remember that those 12 women are counting on you to stay strong. That night, Nicole and I prepared for what was coming. She'd taken leave from her job to avoid the media attention, but reporters had already found our address. Mama, Are you sure about this? Once the trial starts, there's no going back. I looked at my daughter, thinking about all the women Brian had silenced with fear and shame. Baby, some fights are bigger than just our family. The next morning brought our first taste of what was coming. A reporter ambushed us outside the grocery store. Mrs. Williams. Channel 7 News. How does it feel to be responsible for destroying your daughter's marriage? Nicole stepped between us. My mother saved me from a predator. That's the only story here. But I could see the doubt creeping in. The way people stared at us in the store. The whispered conversations that stopped when we walked by. That evening, Brian's lawyer called. Mrs. Williams, this is Gregory Walsh, representing Brian Henderson. I'd like to discuss a settlement. I'm not interested in settling anything. I think you should hear our offer. Brian is willing to accept a quick divorce, full custody remaining with Nicole, and a substantial financial settlement in exchange for you withdrawing your cooperation with federal prosecutors. The number he mentioned made my eyes widen. More money than I'd see in 5 lifetimes. And if I refuse? Then we go to trial, and I destroy your credibility on national television. I'll show the jury a bitter, unemployed woman who couldn't stand her daughter's success. After I hung up, Nicole found me sitting in my kitchen, staring at nothing. What did he want? I told her about the offer, about the threats. Nicole listened quietly, then surprised me. How much money did he offer? Nicole. How much, Mama? I told her. She whistled low. That's a lot of money. Life-changing money. My heart sank. Was my daughter considering taking Brian's blood money? It is, I agreed quietly. Nicole stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where reporters still lingered. You know what that money represents, Mama? What? She turned back to me, and her eyes were blazing. 12 women's silence. 12 women who'll never get justice because we were too scared to fight. The pride that filled my chest was overwhelming. Besides, she continued, I don't need his money. I'm going back to work next week. I'm taking back my maiden name. And I'm going to testify against him. Nicole, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because I was his victim too, Mama. I just didn't recognize it until now. That weekend, Marcus arranged for us to meet with some of Brian's other victims. The meeting was in a church basement in North Charleston, away from media attention. When I walked into that room and saw 12 women ranging from 22 to 35, all with the same haunted look Jessica had worn, my resolve hardened into steel. One by one, they told their stories. Brian's pattern was always the same: charm, manipulation, compromise, then blackmail. He'd been perfecting his technique for years. He told me I reminded him of his wife, said Maria, a paralegal from another firm. Said his marriage was loveless, that he needed someone who understood him. He offered me a promotion, added Tanya, a court reporter. Said he had connections that could advance my career. All I had to do was have dinner with him. When I tried to report him to HR, whispered Ashley, barely out of college, he showed me photos I didn't even know he'd taken. Said my parents would disown me if they saw them. Nicole listened to every story, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry he used our marriage to hurt you. But the woman who broke my heart was Janet, a 50-year-old divorced mother who'd worked as Brian's cleaning lady. He said I should be grateful for his attention, she whispered. Said a woman my age with my background should take what she could get. The room went dead silent. This monster had victimized women across every age, race, and social class. Ladies, I said, standing up, I want you to know something. Next week, when we walk into that courtroom, we're not just fighting for justice. We're fighting for every woman who's ever been told she should be grateful for abuse. Carmen Rodriguez addressed the group next. I won't lie to you. Brian's defense team will try to shame you, discredit you, make you seem like willing participants. But we have evidence now. Hard evidence. And we have each other. After the meeting, Nicole and I drove home in silence. Finally, she spoke. "Mama, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Anything." "When you first met Brian, did you know? Did you know what he was?" I thought carefully about my answer. I knew he was the kind of man who judged people by their circumstances instead of their character. I knew he looked down on our family. But honey, I never imagined he was capable of this level of cruelty. I should have listened to you. You should have listened to yourself. Your instincts were screaming warnings, baby. You just chose to ignore them because you wanted love so badly. Will you forgive me? For choosing him over you? I pulled the car over and looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The woman sitting next to me wasn't the broken girl who'd married Brian. This was someone stronger, someone who'd survived hell and come out fighting. Nicole, there's nothing to forgive. You followed your heart, and that took courage. Now you're following your conscience, and that takes even more courage. What if the jury doesn't believe us? Then we'll know we tried. But baby, I've got a feeling about this case. Brian got comfortable thinking he was smarter than everyone else. But comfortable predators make careless mistakes. That night, I got a call that confirmed my instincts. "Mrs. Williams," Marcus said, "you're not going to believe what Brian did today." "What now?" "He contacted 3 of his victims from jail, trying to convince them not to testify. Made threats about their reputations, their families." "From jail? How is that possible?" "Monitored phone calls. Every word recorded. Carmen says it's the nail in his coffin, witness intimidation from federal custody." As I hung up, I realized something had shifted in this whole ordeal. We weren't just defending ourselves anymore. We were on offense. Brian Henderson had spent years thinking he was untouchable. Next week, he was going to learn what happens when you underestimate a grandmother who's got nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Have you ever been part of something bigger than yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments, because this trial was about to become a battle for justice that would shock everyone in that courtroom. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters when Nicole and I arrived for the first day of trial. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved in our faces, and questions came from every direction. "Mrs. Williams, how does it feel to be responsible for your son-in-law's arrest?" "Nicole, do you regret your marriage?" "Mrs. Williams, what do you say to critics who claim this is racially motivated?" I kept my head high and my mouth shut, just like Carmen had taught me. But inside, my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The courtroom was massive, all dark wood and high ceilings that made me feel small. But when I saw Brian sitting at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, I felt something shift inside me. He looked different. Smaller. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by prison clothes. The confident smile had been replaced by the hollow eyes of a man who knew his world was ending. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. Even from across the room, I could feel his hatred burning into me. Judge Margaret Stone was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who reminded me of my old Sunday school teacher, someone who'd seen every lie and wasn't impressed by any of them. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "you're about to hear testimony regarding a complex case of extortion, blackmail, and financial fraud. I expect your complete attention and your careful consideration of the evidence." Brian's lawyer, Gregory Walsh, stood up for opening statements. He was exactly what I'd expected, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that came from never losing a case. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear a lot of accusations over the next few days. But I want you to remember that accusations are not facts. My client, Brian Henderson, is a successful attorney who's being targeted by a vindictive mother-in-law who couldn't accept her daughter's marriage to a man outside their social circle." The words hit exactly where they were aimed. I saw a few jurors glance at me, and I knew what they were thinking. Was this really about justice, or was I just a bitter old woman causing trouble? But then Carmen stood up, and everything changed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about family drama or social differences. This case is about a predator who used his position, his charm, and his privilege to systematically destroy the lives of vulnerable women. She walked to a large board covered with photos, not the compromising ones, but professional headshots of Brian's victims. These 12 women range in age from 22 to 50. They're paralegals, secretaries, court reporters, and cleaning staff. They're mothers, daughters, sisters. And every single one of them was targeted by Brian Henderson because he thought they were powerless. Carmen's voice got stronger with each word. But Brian Henderson made one crucial mistake. He targeted the daughter of a woman who refused to be powerless. Over the next 3 days, I watched those brave women tell their stories. Jessica went first, her voice shaking but determined. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd make sure I never worked in law again. He said nobody would believe a girl from my background over an established attorney. Maria testified about the photos Brian had taken without her knowledge. I paid him $5,000 to delete them. Money I'd saved for my daughter's college fund. Tanya broke down describing how Brian had destroyed her engagement. When my fiancé saw the photos, he left me. Brian had cost me not just money, but the man I loved. Each testimony was a dagger to Brian's defense. But the most powerful moment came when Ashley, the youngest victim, looked directly at Brian and said, "You told me I was special. You made me believe you cared about me. Then you used my trust to steal my dignity and my money. But you were wrong about one thing, I'm not powerless. None of us are." When it was Nicole's turn to testify, the courtroom was dead silent. I married Brian Henderson because I thought he was everything I wanted in a husband. Successful, confident, sophisticated. Her voice was clear and strong. What I actually married was a man who saw women as objects to be controlled, manipulated, and discarded. Did you witness any of his criminal behavior directly? Carmen asked. I witnessed him systematically isolating me from my family and friends. I witnessed him making mysterious phone calls and having unexplained income. Most importantly, I witnessed him threaten my mother when she tried to protect me. Walsh tried to rattle her during cross-examination. Mrs. Henderson, isn't it true that you're only testifying because your mother convinced you to turn against your husband? Nicole looked at Brian, then at me, then back at Walsh. Mr. Walsh, my mother didn't convince me of anything. She just gave me permission to trust what I already knew in my heart. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to that witness stand thinking about James, about all the women who'd sat in that church basement, about every person who'd ever been told they were powerless. Carmen played the recorded phone call for the jury. Brian's voice filled the courtroom, arrogant and cruel. I've got enough dirt on enough people in this city to bury anyone who tries to cross me. When Walsh cross-examined me, he tried every trick in the book. Mrs. Williams, isn't it true that you resented your son-in-law's success? I resented his treatment of my daughter and other women. Isn't it true that you were jealous of his wealth and status? Mr. Walsh, I've been poor most of my life. I know the difference between money and character. Isn't it true that you orchestrated this entire situation because you couldn't accept your daughter marrying outside her race? The question hung in the air like a bomb. The courtroom was silent. I looked at the jury, then at Brian, then at Walsh. Sir, I would have had the same problem with any man who treated women like property, regardless of his color. After 6 days of testimony, closing arguments began. Walsh painted Brian as a victim of circumstances, a man destroyed by jealous accusations. But Carmen's closing statement was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Henderson sits before you today not because he's the victim of a conspiracy, but because he believed he was untouchable. He believed that women like Mrs. Williams, like Jessica Martinez, like all his victims, were beneath his notice. He was wrong. As the jury filed out to deliberate, I felt the weight of everything we'd endured over the past months. The humiliation, the fear, the fight, all of it came down to 12 strangers deciding whether justice would prevail. How long do you think they'll take? Nicole asked. However long it takes, I said. We've told the truth. Now we wait. But deep down, I had a feeling about those jurors. They'd seen the evidence. They'd heard Brian's own words condemning him. Most importantly, they'd seen what happens when ordinary women refuse to stay quiet. The agent leaned back in her chair, studying me with new respect. "Mrs. Williams, you've just handed us the biggest white-collar criminal network we've seen in the Southeast." 3 months later, the headlines read like something from a crime novel. Charleston attorney's blackmail ring spans 3 states, 47 victims identified. Brian's information had led to arrests in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Richmond. Lawyers, judges, and business executives were being investigated. The case that started with one grandmother's suspicions had exposed corruption that reached into the highest levels of professional society. But the moment that meant the most to me came on a quiet Tuesday evening. I was cooking dinner when my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Jessica standing there with a man about her age and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3. "Mrs. Williams, I wanted you to meet my family." The man stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Robert Martinez, Jessica's husband. I wanted to thank you personally." "Thank me for what?" Jessica took the little girl's hand. "This is Elena, our daughter. When Brian was blackmailing me, I was so ashamed I almost left Robert. I thought I didn't deserve happiness after what happened. But you stayed together. Because you taught me that what happened to me wasn't my fault. That speaking up was braver than staying silent." Little Elena looked up at me with bright, curious eyes. "Are you the lady who caught the bad man?" Jessica smiled. "Yes, baby. This is the lady who caught the bad man." As they left, I stood in my doorway watching this family walk away whole and happy. That little girl would grow up knowing her mother was brave enough to fight for justice. A week later, Nicole called with news that took my breath away. "Mama, the Crime Victims Compensation Fund is giving us an award. All of Brian's victims are getting financial compensation for what they went through." "How much?" "Enough for Jessica to go back to school. Enough for Maria to rebuild her daughter's college fund. Enough for all of us to start over." "And you?" "I'm using mine to start a legal aid fund for women facing harassment. I want to make sure other women have resources I didn't have." That night, I sat on my small balcony looking out over Charleston, thinking about how far we'd all come. A year ago, I was unemployed, dismissed, called a loser by a man who thought he was better than me. Now that man was in federal prison, his victims were free, and my daughter was stronger than ever. My phone buzzed with a text from David, Nicole's new boyfriend. "Mrs. Williams, thank you for raising such an amazing woman. I promise to treat her with the respect and love she deserves." I smiled, thinking about how different this felt from Brian's hollow promises. David's words came with actions: flowers for no reason, patient listening when Nicole had bad days, genuine interest in our family history. But the real victory came the next morning, when Nicole called with an announcement that made my heart soar. "Mama, I've been thinking about what you said. About trusting my instincts and not running from who I am." "What about it?" "I'm moving back to Charleston. I want to be near you. I want our future children to know their grandmother's strength." "Nicole, are you sure? Your career in Atlanta will survive." "But Mama, I lost years trying to be someone I wasn't. I don't want to lose any more time." 6 months later, Nicole moved into an apartment 10 minutes from mine. She'd landed a position with a Charleston firm specializing in victims' rights law. David had moved with her, and when I saw them together, really saw them, I understood what healthy love looked like. He laughed at her jokes, supported her career ambitions, and treated me like family instead of an obstacle. One evening, as the 3 of us sat on my balcony watching the sunset, Nicole made an announcement that stopped my heart. "Mama, David and I have been talking. When we get married, we want you to walk me down the aisle." "Honey, that's David's job." "No," she said firmly. "David will be waiting for me at the altar. But you're the one who fought for me, protected me, and taught me what real strength looks like. You should be the one to give me away." As I looked at my daughter, confident, happy, free, I thought about that terrible wedding day 18 months ago. How Brian's cruelty had started a chain of events that ultimately led to this moment. He'd called me unemployed. A loser. Someone beneath his notice. What he'd actually done was awaken a sleeping giant. Because when you threaten a grandmother's family, you don't just face one woman's anger, you face generations of strength, wisdom, and determination that refuse to be broken. The last laugh belonged to the old woman from Birmingham who'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to stay quiet. Brian Henderson thought he was untouchable. Instead, he discovered that some women don't just fight back, they fight to win. And this grandmother? She won everything that mattered. The end. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courage, justice, and family strength. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama that proves truth is always more powerful than fiction. What would you do if someone threatened your family? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary acts of courage. Welcome to the family, and we'll see you in the next story. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. 6 hours that felt like 6 years. Nicole and I sat in the courthouse cafeteria, picking at sandwiches we couldn't taste, jumping every time someone walked by. Carmen checked on us twice, both times saying the same thing: no news is good news in cases like this. At 4:30 p.m., the call came. Juries reached a verdict. Courtroom A, 15 minutes. My legs felt like jelly as we walked back into that packed courtroom. Brian sat at the defense table, his face pale but defiant. When he turned to look at us, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: genuine fear. The 12 jurors filed in, their faces unreadable. Judge Stone called for order as the room buzzed with tension. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged black man who reminded me of my late husband, stood up. We have, Your Honor. On the count of extortion in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. The word hit the courtroom like thunder. Someone behind us gasped. Brian's head dropped into his hands. On the count of blackmail and coercion, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of wire fraud and theft, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of witness intimidation, how do you find? Guilty. By the time the foreman finished reading all 15 counts, Brian Henderson had been found guilty on every single charge. The man who'd called me a loser was facing 25 to 30 years in federal prison. Judge Stone's voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Henderson, please stand. Brian rose on shaky legs, his expensive lawyer steadying him. Mr. Henderson, the crimes you've committed represent a systematic abuse of power that strikes at the heart of our justice system. You used your education, your position, and your privilege to prey upon vulnerable women, then tried to silence them with fear and shame. The judge paused, looking directly at Brian. But you made one crucial error in judgment. You underestimated the power of women who refuse to be victims. She turned toward our section of the courtroom. Mrs. Williams, would you please stand? I stood up, my knees shaking, wondering what was coming next. Mrs. Williams, your courage in speaking out against this defendant, despite personal cost and public scrutiny, exemplifies the best of our legal system. Because of your actions, 12 women will receive justice, and future victims will be spared. The applause that followed was thunderous. Reporters were scribbling furiously. Camera phones appeared despite the court's restrictions. Mr. Henderson, Judge Stone continued, I hereby sentence you to 27 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 15 years. Additionally, you will pay restitution in the amount of $450,000 to your victims. Brian's legs gave out. His lawyer caught him as he crumpled. Furthermore, the judge said, you are permanently barred from practicing law in any jurisdiction. As court officers led Brian away in handcuffs, he turned one last time to look at me. The hatred in his eyes was pure poison, but there was something else: defeat. The man who'd whispered, "loser," in my ear on my daughter's wedding day was being led away to spend the best years of his remaining life in a federal penitentiary. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was intense. But this time, I was ready for them. Mrs. Williams. How does it feel to get justice? I looked into the cameras, thinking about every woman who'd been too afraid to speak up, every mother who'd watched their child suffer in silence. It feels like the system worked the way it's supposed to. When good people stand up to bullies, bullies lose. What would you say to other families dealing with similar situations? I'd say trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And don't let anyone convince you that staying quiet is safer than speaking up. Mrs. Williams. Any regrets about how this all played out? I thought about the question seriously. The media attention, the stress, the way this had torn our family apart before putting it back together. My only regret is that it took so long for me to act. Those 12 women suffered while I tried to keep peace in the family. That evening, Nicole and I celebrated quietly in my apartment. No champagne, no party, just Chinese takeout and the deep satisfaction of knowing we'd done the right thing. "Mama, I need to tell you something." "What's that, baby?" "When I married Brian, I thought I was choosing a better life. What I was really doing was running away from who I am." "What do you mean?" "I mean I was ashamed of where I came from. Our little apartment, your factory jobs, the way we struggled. I thought marrying Brian would erase all of that. And now?" Nicole smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "Now I know that our struggles made us strong. That your sacrifices made me who I am. That our family is worth more than all his money and status combined." Later that night, as Nicole slept in her old bedroom, I sat in my kitchen reading thank you letters from Brian's victims. Women I'd never met, thanking me for giving them their lives back. But the letter that meant the most came from Jessica, "Mrs. Williams, you saved me before I even knew I needed saving. Thank you for showing me that some fights are worth having." 3 months after calling me a loser, Brian Henderson was prisoner number 47291 in a federal facility. His law license was gone, his reputation destroyed, his freedom stolen. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone destroy themselves. What's the bravest thing you've ever done for someone you love? Tell us in the comments, because this grandmother's story has one final twist that will leave you speechless. 6 months after Brian's sentencing, life had settled into a new rhythm. Nicole had moved back to Atlanta, taken a promotion at her firm, and was dating a kind pediatrician named David who treated her like the treasure she was. I'd started speaking at women's groups around the South, sharing our story and encouraging others to trust their instincts. The speaking fees weren't much, but they covered my bills and gave me purpose. But the story wasn't quite over. On a crisp November morning, I received a letter that made me laugh out loud for the first time in years. It was from the IRS. Brian's financial crimes had triggered an audit that revealed something nobody expected. He'd been filing fraudulent tax returns for the past 5 years, claiming charitable donations he'd never made and business expenses that were actually personal purchases. The government wanted their money back. With interest and penalties, Brian owed the IRS over $600,000. Since he had no assets left after paying restitution to his victims, guess who they came after? Nicole. As his wife during the years of tax fraud, she was potentially liable for his debt. The letter requested her presence at an IRS office in Atlanta within 30 days. When Nicole called me, panicked, I could barely contain my excitement. "Mama, they want to hold me responsible for taxes on money I never saw, from crimes I didn't know about. How is that fair? Honey, call Carmen Rodriguez immediately. This might be the best thing that could happen to us." How can this be good news? Because I have an idea. 2 weeks later, I sat in Carmen's office with a proposal that made the prosecutor's eyes light up with possibilities. "You want to offer the government information in exchange for Nicole's immunity? I want to give them something worth more than $600,000. I pulled out a folder I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Marcus found these in Brian's home computer before it was seized. Carmen opened the folder and her jaw dropped. What am I looking at? Names, addresses, and financial records for every client Brian ever blackmailed. Not just the 12 women who testified, dozens of them, going back 7 years. The papers showed a network of corruption that extended far beyond Charleston. Brian had been running blackmail operations in 3 states, targeting women in law firms, government offices, and corporate boardrooms. Mrs. Williams, this information could expose a conspiracy involving hundreds of thousands of dollars and potentially dozens of additional victims. And Nicole's tax liability? Carmen smiled. I think we can make that disappear in exchange for this cooperation. The meeting with federal investigators took place in a secure office building in Atlanta. Nicole and I sat across from 6 agents who looked like they'd just discovered buried treasure. Mrs. Williams, this information you've provided opens up cases we didn't even know existed. We're looking at RICO charges, interstate commerce violations, organized criminal activity. What does that mean for the women involved? It means justice on a scale we never imagined possible. Agent Davis, who'd arrested Brian, was leading the expanded investigation. Mrs. Williams, how did you know to save these records? Because I knew Brian was the kind of man who would keep trophies of his victims. Men like him can't resist documenting their power over others. The agent leaned back in her chair, studying me with newfound respect. Mrs. Williams, you've just handed us the keys to dismantling one of the largest blackmail operations we've ever seen. This goes way beyond what we prosecuted Brian for. Good, I said simply. Because what he did to Nicole and those other women was just the tip of the iceberg. 3 weeks later, Carmen called with news that felt like Christmas morning. The IRS has agreed to drop all claims against Nicole in exchange for her continued cooperation. And there's more. The federal task force has made 17 additional arrests based on the information you provided. They're calling it Operation Clean Slate. I hung up the phone and looked out my kitchen window at the dogwood tree where I used to sit and cry during the worst days of our ordeal. Now its bare November branches looked like they were reaching towards something better, ready for whatever spring would bring. The phone call that would change everything was scheduled for exactly 5 p.m. Carmen would call with the final word on whether our civil lawsuit against Brian's estate had been approved, and whether Nicole would receive the financial compensation that could help her rebuild her life completely. Our lives would either continue as they'd been or be transformed by a justice system that had finally listened to women like us. Whatever happened next, Nicole and I would face it together. Because that's what we'd been doing for years now, and court decisions couldn't change the fact that we belonged to each other in ways that went deeper than any legal document could reach. We'd survived worst, and now we were ready for whatever came next.